Hi, welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, I'll be featuring the case of Cary Stayner. So let's go ahead and find out more. Let's go ahead and dive on in. Cary Stayner was born on August 13th, 1961. He was raised in Merced, California. In 1972, Cary's younger brother, Stephen, was kidnapped by child molester Kenneth Parnell and was held captive for more than 7 years before finally he was able to escape and be reunited with his family. When Stephen escaped home in 1980, he received massive media attention. Stephen tragically would later die in a motorcycle accident in 1989. 1990, Cary was now living with his uncle, and one day his uncle was tragically murdered. In 1991, Cary attempted suicide but failed. In 1997, Cary was arrested for possession of marijuana and methamphetamine. All of the charges against him, however, would later be dropped. Also in 1997, Cary was hired as a handyman at the Cedar Lodge Motel in El Portal, which is just outside Highway 140 Arch Rock, the entrance to Yosemite National Park. 1999, between February and July, Cary would go on to murder 4 women. Those women were Carol Sund and her daughter, Julie Sund, their travel companion, Argentinian exchange student Silvina Peloso, and Yosemite National Institute employee, Joey Armstrong. First, March 18th, 1999, the first 2 victims, Carol Sund and Silvina Peloso, were both found in the trunk of the charred remains of Carol's Pontiac rental car. Both bodies were burned beyond recognition. They were only able to be identified by using dental records. A note was then sent to police with a hand-drawn map indicating the location of the 3rd victim, Julie Sund. The top of the note read, quote, "We had fun with this one," end quote. March 25th, 1999, investigators went to the location drawn on the map, and there they found the remains of Julie Sund. Her throat had been cut. Detectives began to interview the employees of the Cedar Lodge Motel. This was because the first 3 victims had been staying there just prior to their deaths. One of the employees that the police interviewed was Cary Stayner. However, police did not consider him to be a suspect. He had no criminal history, and he remained calm during the police interview. July 22nd, 1999, a 4th victim, Joey Armstrong, was found. Her body had been decapitated. With this victim, however, witnesses said they saw a blue 1979 International Scout parked outside the cabin where Joey had been staying. With this tip, police were able to trace the owner of that vehicle, and the owner turned out to be Cary Stayner. Now police considered Cary to be the prime suspect in this case. July 24th, 1999, FBI agents John Bowles and Jeff Rinnick located Cary. He was at a nudist resort called Laguna del Sol in Wilton. He had been staying there, and he was promptly arrested. While the police searched Cary's vehicle, detectives found evidence that linked Cary to the victim, Joey Armstrong. Now, while Cary was interviewed by the police, he confessed not just to Joey's murder, but to the other 3 murders. He also confessed to sending in the note of the map where police could find Julieson's body. Cary claimed after his initial arrest that he had fantasized about murdering women, and he had fantasized about this since he was a little kid, long before the abduction of his younger brother. In a taped confession made in the Sacramento FBI office, Cary described how at first he planned to rape and kill his girlfriend and the girlfriend's 8 and 11-year-old daughters. The only reason he didn't go through with this was because there was a male caretaker on his girlfriend's 10-acre property. He also told police that on February 14th, 1999, Valentine's Day, he stalked 4 young girls who were staying at Cedar Lodge. The only reason he backed off from these 4 girls was because they were accompanied by a man. February 15th, 1999, Cary said that is when he decided on Carol Sund and the 2 teenage girls. This was after he was spying on them through their window at the lodge. Cary stated, he knocked on their motel room door. Their mother was reading a book, and the 2 teenage girls were watching Jerry Maguire on the television. He said he was there to fix the fan in the bathroom. That secured his entrance into the room. Once inside, he pulled a .22 caliber pistol, and he told all of them he was, quote, desperate, end quote. And he ordered Carol, her daughter Julie, and friend Sylvina to lie face down on their beds. He then proceeded to bind their hands with duct tape and gagged each of them. He strangled Carol with a 3-foot piece of rope. This process took 5 minutes. Cary said of this, quote, I didn't realize how hard it is to strangle a person. It's not easy. I had very little feeling. It was like performing a task, end quote. He then put her body in the trunk of her rented Pontiac Grand Prix vehicle. Cary then focused his attention on the 2 teenage girls. He ripped and cut their clothes off. He tried to get them to perform sex acts on each other, but he became irritated because Sylvina started to cry, so he led her into the bathroom. Once in there, she knelt down in the bathtub, and he strangled her to death. Cary now focused his attention on Julie, and he proceeded to sexually assault her in the family's motel room and sexually assault her in the room next door. After he left Julie on the bed, tied up, nude, but he put on the TV for her to watch. This was while he cleaned up the crime scene and dumped Sylvina's body in the trunk of the car next to Carol's body. Cary tried to make the room so it would appear that the women had just checked out and left the motel. He then wrapped Julie, who was still naked, in a pink motel blanket, brought her to the vehicle, and together they drove away in the rental car. He bound her in the passenger seat so she could not escape. Cary said of this quote, I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. I just kept driving and driving, end quote. Along the way, he said he came to like Julie. Quote, she was a very likable girl. She was very calm, end quote. It was not until the morning of February 16th, 1999, after hours and hours of driving, Cary turned off at the Lake Don Pedro and carried Julie up a warm dirt path. There was a small clearing that overlooked the water. Quote, I told her I wished I could keep her, end quote. Cary then went on to sexually assault Julie again. Finally, he brushed her hair and fanned it out on the ground beneath her head. Quote, I told her I loved her, end quote. Then Cary slit Julie's throat. Quote, I did not want her to suffer the way the other two did, end quote. After slitting her throat, he hid Julie's body in the thicket nearby, and he drove the car that still had Carol and Sylvina's bodies in the trunk as far as he could into a forest. He then took a cab back to Yosemite Valley, and he paid the fare in cash, $150. He got the $150 that he stole from Carol's purse. 2 days later, Cary returned to that abandoned car with a can of gasoline, and he lit the car on fire. Then he drove 2 hours west and dumped Carol's billfold into a Modesto street corner. He wanted to try to fool police on what happened. Their buried remains were not found for over a month. It was Julie's body that was not found until a week after that, and that was only because of Cary's anonymous note with the map that he had sent to police. In 2000, Cary struck a plea bargain in order to avoid the death penalty. He would receive life in prison for the murder of Joey Armstrong. When he was formally being sentenced to life in prison, Cary cried and he begged for forgiveness from the Armstrong family. Quote, I wish I didn't do this terrible thing, end quote. He then said, quote, I gave into terrible, dark dreams that I tried to subdue. I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you why. I don't even know myself. I wish Joey was here, but she isn't. I am so sorry, end quote. A few days later, Cary decided to change his plea. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity to the murder of the 3 sightseers. June 14th, 2001, Santa Clara Superior Court Judge Thomas Hastings ordered Cary to stand trial for the murders of the 3 women. He set the arraignment date for July 16th, 2001. During that trial, Cary's lawyers claimed that the Stayner family had a history of sexual abuse and mental illness, and this manifested itself not only in the murders, but also in Cary's request for child pornography. Yes, Cary, in return for his confession, requested child pornography. The defense said this was an obsessive-compulsive disorder in OCD. The jury found him sane and convicted him of 4 counts of first-degree murder. December 12th, 2002, during the penalty phase of Cary's trial, he was sentenced to death. Cary demanded that he be incarcerated at a prison near his parents' home and demanded that he be given a large cachet of child pornography. To this day, Cary Stayner is still on death row. That is the case of Cary Stayner. Thank you for sticking around for another episode of Danny After Dark. Do you have any questions or comments on the case? Leave it down below. Let's be interactive. Do you have a suggestion for a case that you'd like me to cover? Well, leave it down below, and you may see it featured in an upcoming episode. Until next time, remember, we don't live in darkness. darkness lives in us.